You know, I've often wondered what it is about a little bit of power that can turn an otherwise unremarkable person into a petty tyrant. Maybe you've wondered that too. Or maybe you've had the distinct displeasure of experiencing it firsthand, perhaps with a condo board, a zealous neighborhood watch captain, or, as in my case, an HOA president who seemed to believe her title was interchangeable with Queen of the Universe. This particular story, the one I'm about to share, isn't just about any HOA squabble. Oh no. This is the story of my grand escape, and how the very person who made my life in that neighborhood a masterclass in micromanaged misery tried to stop me from leaving, only to have her carefully constructed world of petty dominion come crashing down in the most spectacularly public, and for me, deeply satisfying way. She called the cops on me for moving out. And boy, did that backfire. My name is Arthur Jenkins, and for most of my working life, I was a logistics manager for a large shipping company. My days revolved around precision, schedules, efficiency, and making sure countless moving parts aligned perfectly. When I retired, all I wanted was the opposite: quiet, unscheduled days, the freedom to tinker in my garden, and a distinct lack of anyone telling me what precise shade of beige my mailbox had to be. We'd bought our house in Pleasant Valley Estates years ago, before the HOA, or at least this particular iteration of it, had quite so many teeth. Or rather, before Brenda Armitage took the helm and decided the covenants, conditions, and restrictions were a personal scepter of power. Brenda. Just the name conjures up an image, doesn't it? She was a woman who seemed to be perpetually wound a bit too tight, her silver hair coiffed into a rigid helmet that defied wind and, apparently, reason. Her wardrobe consisted primarily of power pantsuits in shades that nature never intended for fabric: electric blue, canary yellow, a particularly offensive lime green, often accessorized with chunky, clanking jewelry. She patrolled the streets of Pleasant Valley Estates in a pristine white golf cart, the Community Harmony vehicle, as she dubbed it, her eyes scanning for infractions with the intensity of a hawk spotting a field mouse. And let me tell you, in Brenda's world, an unedged lawn or a slightly askew holiday decoration was not just an infraction, it was a personal affront to the very fabric of civilized society. Pleasant Valley Estates. The name itself became a source of bitter irony for many of us. It was, on the surface, a lovely neighborhood, well-kept lawns, mature trees, the kind of place where you'd expect quiet contentment. But under Brenda's reign, a low hum of anxiety pervaded the air. You learned to check the HOA rulebook before, say, considering a new brand of fertilizer, lest it contain an unapproved nitrogen-to-potassium ratio. I'm only slightly exaggerating. Her dedication to enforcement was legendary, her interpretation of the rules often bordering on the surreal. There was a quiet understanding among most residents: avoid Brenda's gaze, comply with the often nonsensical directives, and pray you weren't next on her list. I'd had a few minor run-ins myself over the years, nothing major, but enough to know she wasn't someone you reasoned with. She saw compromise as weakness and discussion as insubordination. My wife, Sarah, and I had decided, after much deliberation, that our golden years were not meant to be spent deciphering the subclauses of Article 4, Section B, Subsection 3, pertaining to approved shrubbery height variability. We found a lovely little place about an hour away, blissfully free of any homeowners association. The decision to move was less about running away from something and more about running towards peace, but I can't deny that the thought of escaping Brenda's jurisdiction added a certain spring to my step. We'd already sold our house in Pleasant Valley, the closing was set, and all that remained was the physical act of moving. The final act, I hoped, in the Brenda Armitage saga of my life. I should have known it wouldn't be that simple. The minor skirmishes I mentioned, looking back, were mere appetizers for the main course Brenda unknowingly had planned for my departure. There was the infamous petunia incident, where my vibrant red petunias were deemed excessively flamboyant, and, not in keeping with the muted floral palette preferred by the Architectural Review Committee, a committee which, as far as anyone could tell, consisted solely of Brenda and her reflection in the window of her golf cart. I'd received a sternly worded letter, printed on neon pink paper, her signature color for urgent violations, demanding their immediate removal or a fine of $25 per day, per petunia. I remember counting them, there were 12. I replaced them with beige impatiens, which apparently met the muted floral palette requirement, though they looked utterly miserable. Then there was the garden hose protocol violation. My hose, neatly coiled on a hanger by the side of the house, was apparently visible from the street for more than the approved 2-hour window post use. Another pink letter. Another sigh. I bought a hose reel box, beige of course. My general strategy had always been one of reluctant, documented compliance. As a logistics man, I documented everything. Every pink letter, every email exchange, every muttered curse under my breath, though those weren't for the official record. I figured it was easier to capitulate on the small, absurd things than to engage in a protracted war of wills with a woman who clearly had far more time and inclination for such battles than I did. But Brenda, it seemed, didn't interpret compliance as a peacekeeping measure. She saw it as validation. Each victory, no matter how petty, seemed to embolden her, to puff up her sense of authority just a little bit more. Her patrols in the community harmony vehicle became more frequent, her pronouncements at the sparsely attended HOA meetings more grandiose. She started referring to the CCRs as our sacred texts, and to herself, implicitly, as their high priestess. It was exhausting, and frankly, a little sad. Her modus operandi was consistent, a visual sighting of a perceived infraction, followed swiftly by the dreaded pink letter, often hand-delivered to the mailbox with a theatrical flourish if she thought you were home. If you dared to question the violation, you'd be met with a condescending explanation, usually involving a tortured interpretation of a vaguely worded bylaw, and a reminder of the escalating fine schedule. It was a system designed to wear you down, and for the most part, it worked. People just wanted to live their lives, not debate the philosophical implications of mailbox design with Brenda Armitage. The final straw, the incident that truly cemented our decision to expedite our departure from Pleasant Valley Estates, wasn't even a formal violation. It was her reaction when I politely informed her, as a courtesy and because the bylaws required notification of a sale, that we would be moving. I'd caught her during one of her patrols, as she was meticulously measuring the distance between Mr. Henderson's newly planted rose bushes with a tape measure. "Brenda," I said, approaching cautiously. "Just wanted to let you know, Sarah and I have sold our house. We'll be moving out at the end of next month." She straightened up, her eyes narrowing. Instead of a polite, "Oh, we'll be sad to see you go," or even a neutral, "Thank you for the notification," she put her hands on her hips, the tape measure swinging like a tiny, metallic pendulum of doom. "Moving out, Arthur," she said, her voice dripping with something that sounded suspiciously like accusation. "Well, there are procedures, you know. Move-out inspections. Final landscaping reviews. We can't have just anyone leaving the community in a state of disarray. It impacts curb appeal for everyone." She then launched into a litany of supposed requirements, none of which were actually in the CCRs regarding a sale and departure, implying that she, personally, would need to sign off on the condition of my empty house after I'd moved out, but before the new owners took possession. It was an overreach so audacious it almost took my breath away. The sheer gall of it, trying to insert herself into a private property transaction beyond her remit. That conversation was the catalyst. My logistics brain, the one that craved order and despised inefficiency and arbitrary blockades, went into overdrive. I wasn't just moving, I was planning an extraction. I reread the HOA bylaws pertaining to moving and property sales, all perfectly reasonable, requiring notification and ensuring common areas weren't damaged during the move. Nothing about Brenda's personal inspection of my sock drawer. I hired a reputable moving company, confirmed dates, and sent Brenda a formal, certified letter outlining my move-out date, the name of the moving company, and a polite reminder of the actual HOA regulations regarding moves, subtly highlighting what wasn't included. I wanted everything above board, unimpeachable. My son, Mark, is a police officer. He's a good cop, calm under pressure, fair-minded, pretty much the antithesis of Brenda. I'd told him about our move, of course, and shared a few of the more colorful Brenda anecdotes over the years. He'd usually just shake his head and chuckle, but he understood the undercurrent of stress she caused. A few days before the move, I called him. "Mark," I said, "just a heads up. We're moving on Saturday." Given Brenda's enthusiasm for inserting herself where she doesn't belong, I have a slight concern she might try to cause some sort of issue. I wasn't asking him to intervene, just making him aware. I also decided to set up my old hunting trail camera, discreetly positioned to overlook my driveway and the street in front of my house. Not that I expected a full-blown siege, but with Brenda, it paid to be prepared. My years in logistics taught me that anticipating potential problems is half the battle. My internal monologue during that final week was a strange cocktail of elation and apprehension. I found myself daydreaming about my new garden, about planting whatever color petunias I darn well pleased, about the blissful absence of neon pink letters. But a small, nagging part of me kept replaying scenarios where Brenda would try to derail the entire operation. Would she try to block the moving truck? Would she invent some last-minute fine or lien? The woman's capacity for petty obstruction, I was learning, seemed boundless. My determination solidified. This move was happening, come hell or high water, or even a pantsuit HOA president. Mark had listened patiently, as he always did. "Sounds like a character, Dad," he'd said. "Just keep everything by the book. If she does try to cause trouble, genuine trouble, don't engage if you don't have to. Call the non-emergency line if she's being obstructive but not threatening. If she escalates, well, that's what 911 is for. Hopefully, it'll just be a smooth day." He was right, of course. Professional, calm advice. I felt a bit better knowing he was aware, though I certainly didn't anticipate him playing a starring role in the day's drama. Life, however, has a peculiar sense of humor. Moving day dawned bright and clear, a perfect late spring morning. The birds were singing, the air was fresh, it felt like the universe was giving me a thumbs up for my escape. The moving truck from Reliable Movers Incorporated, a name I'd chosen for its reassuring solidity, arrived precisely at 8 a.m., just as scheduled. The crew, led by a burly, cheerful fellow named Dave, was efficient and professional. They surveyed the house, laid down protective runners, and began the systematic process of emptying 2 decades of our lives into their cavernous truck. I stood on the porch, sipping coffee, a genuine smile on my face. Freedom was so close I could almost taste it. And then, like a gaudily dressed harbinger of headaches, Brenda Armitage appeared. Not in her golf cart this time, but on foot, marching down the sidewalk with a clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. She was wearing a particularly aggressive shade of purple pantsuit today, with what looked like a small pair of binoculars hanging around her neck. My heart sank, but I kept my expression neutral. "Good morning, Brenda," I said, my voice far calmer than I felt. "Arthur," she acknowledged, her tone frosty. "I see the extraction is underway." She peered at the moving truck, then at the items being carried out. "I trust everything is proceeding according to community guidelines." She didn't wait for an answer but began to circle the truck, her eyes narrowed, as if expecting to find contraband. Then, she stopped by a stack of my meticulously cultivated potted rose bushes, awaiting their journey to a new, friendlier garden. "These roses," she declared, pointing with her pen. "Are those the Crimson Glory varietal?" I confirmed they were. She mused, tapping her chin. "I seem to recall a recent addendum to the landscaping bylaws regarding the removal of significant established plantings without prior committee approval. It's about maintaining neighborhood aesthetic continuity, you see." This was new. This was impressively audacious, even for her. "Brenda," I said, keeping my voice level, "these are my personal plants, on my property, being moved to my new home. There is no bylaw preventing me from taking my own possessions when I move." I had, of course, scoured the bylaws for any such nonsense. The moving crew paused, looking uncertain. Dave, the foreman, glanced from Brenda to me. Brenda puffed herself up. "That's a matter of interpretation, Arthur. These plants have contributed to the overall aesthetic tapestry of Pleasant Valley Estates for years. Their removal could be seen as detrimental to the community." She then gestured towards a small pile of decorative river stones I'd used to edge a flower bed, now neatly bagged for transport. "And those stones? Those are clearly common area enhancement materials that have migrated onto your property. They belong to the HOA." This was beyond absurd. These were stones I'd bought myself from a garden center. "Brenda," I said, a note of firmness entering my voice, "those stones were purchased by me. This is my property. These are my belongings. Your authority as HOA president does not extend to confiscating my personal possessions or dictating what I can take when I move from a house I have legally sold." I could feel my blood pressure starting to rise. The movers were now openly staring, their professionalism warring with their clear bemusement. Her face hardened. "We'll just see about that, Arthur. This truck isn't leaving until I'm satisfied that no community assets are being improperly removed," and with that, she planted herself squarely in front of the moving truck's ramp, arms crossed, clipboard held aloft like a scepter. "I am the president of this homeowners association, and I am ensuring adherence to our bylaws," she declared, her voice rising in volume, clearly intended for the movers and any curious neighbors who might be peeking through their curtains. She was, quite literally, obstructing the lawful removal of my property. My annoyance was rapidly escalating into a cold anger, but my logistics training kicked in: assess, analyze, act. I knew arguing with her was pointless. She was on a power trip, convinced of her own righteousness. "Dave," I said to the moving foreman, calmly, "please instruct your men to pause for a moment. It appears we have an unexpected delay." I pulled out my phone. Brenda smirked, clearly believing I was about to concede or call the HOA management company, who she had wrapped around her little finger. Internally, I was thinking, she's actually doing it. She's really going this far. Part of me was furious, but another, smaller part, the part that appreciated cosmic irony, was almost impressed by the sheer, unadulterated audacity. This woman was so drunk on her thimbleful of power that she genuinely believed she could physically prevent a moving truck from leaving, based on a fantasy about rose bushes and garden stones. The moving crew exchanged bewildered glances. My carefully planned, efficient move was now grinding to a halt because of Brenda's delusion of grandeur. I took a deep breath. I knew exactly who I needed to call. It wasn't the HOA. "Brenda," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "You are currently obstructing a legal commercial operation and attempting to prevent me from moving my personal property from a house I no longer own, as of the closing date. You are trespassing on my right to move freely. I am going to ask you one more time to please step away from the truck." She tilted her chin defiantly. "I will not. Not until I have assurances about community property." Her voice was getting shrill. "I am protecting the assets of Pleasant Valley Estates." Theatrically, she whipped out her own phone. "And if you persist, Arthur, I will be forced to call the police and report your unauthorized removal of said assets and your belligerent attitude." "You do that, Brenda," I said quietly. "You go right ahead and call them, because I already had." While she was delivering her monologue, I discreetly dialed the non-emergency police line and explained the situation. An individual, the HOA president, was obstructing a moving truck and making baseless claims to prevent me from leaving my former residence. I gave my name, the address, and a brief description of Brenda's actions. I didn't mention my son. I wanted this handled by the book, by whichever officers were on duty. Brenda, however, true to her dramatic flair, was already on the phone to 911. "Yes, 911. I need an officer immediately at 124 Willow Creek Lane. It's Brenda Armitage, president of Pleasant Valley Estates Homeowners Association. We have a resident, a former resident, attempting to abscond with community property. He's becoming very aggressive." "Yes, aggressive. And he's trying to flee the scene with a large truck full of things." She shot me a venomous look. "Hurry, please. Before he gets away with everything." She hung up with a flourish, looking immensely pleased with herself. "There," she announced. "The authorities will sort this out. They'll see who's in the right here." I just watched her, a strange sense of calm settling over me. The trail camera on the tree was, I knew, silently recording her entire performance. The moving crew looked like they wanted the earth to swallow them. Dave, the foreman, just sighed and shook his head, muttering something about, "Seen it all now." The minutes ticked by, thick with attention only Brenda seemed to relish. She paced back and forth in front of the ramp, occasionally glaring at me or the movers, as if daring us to make a move. Then, we heard it. The distant but approaching wail of a siren. Brenda's expression became one of smug anticipation. She straightened her purple pantsuit, adjusted her imaginary crown, and prepared to greet her saviors, the enforcers of her will. A police cruiser turned onto Willow Creek Lane and pulled up to the curb. My heart did a little jump, not of fear, but of a very different emotion. Because as the driver's side door opened, out stepped Officer Mark Thompson, my son. His partner, a stern-looking woman I didn't know, Officer Ramirez, exited from the passenger side. Brenda, oblivious, practically skipped towards them. "Officers. Thank heavens you're here," she gushed, pointing a dramatic finger at me. "This man, Arthur Jenkins, he's trying to leave with community property. Rose bushes, decorative stones, who knows what else is in that truck. I, as president of the HOA, am trying to stop him, but he's being incredibly difficult and obstructive." Mark, bless his professional heart, didn't even glance in my direction initially. His face was pure, impartial law enforcement. "Ma'am," he said, his voice calm and authoritative, the voice he used when he was unequivocally on duty. "Could you please explain exactly what property you believe is being taken?" Officer Ramirez stood slightly behind him, her gaze assessing the scene, taking in the moving truck, me on the porch, the nervous movers. Brenda launched into her tirade again, embellishing as she went. "He's gutting the aesthetic integrity of our neighborhood. Those roses are a landmark. The stones are HOA standard. He's been nothing but trouble, and now this. He's flouting all the rules. I demand you inspect that truck and make him return what's ours." She was practically vibrating with self-righteous indignation. My son listened patiently, occasionally nodding, his expression unreadable. I saw Officer Ramirez make a small note on her pad. When Brenda finally paused for breath, Mark turned his gaze to me. "Sir," he said, still in that formal tone, "could I hear your side of this?" It was only then, as he made eye contact, that I saw the faintest flicker in his eyes, a tiny spark of recognition almost instantly suppressed. But Brenda, caught up in her own drama, noticed nothing. "Officer," I began, stepping forward calmly. "My name is Arthur Jenkins. I am, or rather was, the owner of this property. It was sold, and the closing occurred yesterday. I am in the process of moving my personal belongings to my new home. This lady," I gestured to Brenda, "is Brenda Armitage, the HOA president. She is attempting to prevent my movers from leaving, claiming that my personal rose bushes and some landscaping stones I purchased are community property. They are not. All items being moved are my personal possessions." I held out the bill of sale for the house and a copy of my moving contract. "The moving truck is legally parked and is being loaded with my effects." Mark took the papers, glanced at them. Officer Ramirez had moved closer to Brenda. "Ma'am," Officer Ramirez said, her voice firm but polite, "do you have any documentation to support your claim that these specific items belong to the HOA? A purchase receipt, an inventory list referencing these items as HOA assets?" Brenda sputtered. "Documentation? I am the president. My word should be enough. It's common knowledge those are community enhancements." She waved her clipboard vaguely. "It's probably in the bylaws somewhere, under aesthetic maintenance." Her bluster was starting to deflate ever so slightly under the calm, professional scrutiny. Mark handed my papers back. "Sir, your paperwork seems to be in order." "Ma'am," he turned back to Brenda, "HOA bylaws are civil agreements. They don't typically grant the HOA ownership of a resident's personal landscaping unless explicitly deeded or purchased by the HOA. Do you have anything showing these specific items were purchased by or deeded to the HOA?" "Well, no, not on me," Brenda admitted, her voice losing some of its confident ring. "But it's understood. It's always been understood. He can't just take them." She was starting to sound desperate. "And he was aggressive. He threatened me." Officer Ramirez raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, did he physically threaten you or verbally threaten you with harm?" Brenda hesitated. "Well, he was very firm. And his tone, it was uncooperative." I saw Mark exchange a quick, almost imperceptible glance with Officer Ramirez. This was the point where Brenda's narrative, built on a foundation of self-importance and outright lies, was beginning to crumble. Mark then said, "Ma'am, we received a 911 call from you alleging theft and aggressive behavior. We also received a non-emergency call from Mr. Jenkins here, alleging obstruction of his lawful move. Making a false report to emergency services is a serious offense." Brenda's face paled slightly under her usual layer of indignation. "It's not false. He is taking things," she insisted, but her voice now had a distinct wobble. It was at this precise moment, as the gears of actual law began to grind against the rusty cogs of her imagined authority, that Mark allowed just a hint of personal recognition to surface. He looked from Brenda back to me, and then he said, his voice still professional but with an undertone that only I, and perhaps a very astute observer, might catch, "Dad, are these movers ready to get back to work?" The word hung in the air. Dad. Brenda's jaw, which had been working furiously, suddenly froze mid-chug. Her eyes, wide and disbelieving, darted from Mark's face to mine, then back to Mark's. The color drained from her face, replaced by a sort of mottled, unhealthy gray. It was as if all the air had been sucked out of her purple pantsuit. The shift was instantaneous and glorious to behold. The smug certainty, the arrogance, the absolute conviction of her own power, it all just evaporated. Dad, she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Officer Ramirez, to her credit, maintained a professional poker face, but I thought I saw the corner of her mouth twitch. Mark nodded curtly. Yes, ma'am. This is my father. Now, about those allegations you made on a recorded 911 call. Brenda looked like she'd been poleaxed. Her entire world, the one where she was the supreme authority and everyone else was a subject, had just tilted on its axis and thrown her into a ditch. The realization that the authorities she had so confidently summoned were not only not on her side, but that one of them was intimately connected to her victim, was a blow from which she clearly wasn't going to recover quickly. Mark continued, his tone all business again. Ma'am, based on the information we have, and your admission that you have no proof these items belong to the HOA, it appears you may have knowingly made a false report to emergency services. That's a violation of Penal Code Section 1485. Furthermore, your actions in physically obstructing this move could constitute disorderly conduct or even unlawful detention, depending on how we want to look at it. Officer Ramirez was now looking at Brenda with a very pointed, unimpressed expression. But he was. Brenda was stammering, lost. The fight had gone out of her completely. She looked small, deflated, her purple pantsuit suddenly looking less like a power uniform and more like a clown costume. I was just trying to protect the community, she whispered, a pathetic attempt at justification. By misusing emergency services and harassing a citizen lawfully going about his business. Officer Ramirez interjected, her voice sharp. Ma'am, we take false reporting very seriously. It diverts resources from genuine emergencies. Mark then stepped forward. Brenda Armitage, he said, his voice devoid of any warmth now, you are being detained for investigation of making a false police report and misuse of the 911 system. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back. Brenda's eyes widened in genuine terror. Detained? Arrested? You can't. But her protest was weak, fueled by shock rather than conviction. Officer Ramirez calmly took Brenda's arm. There was no dramatic struggle. Brenda, the iron-willed scourge of Pleasant Valley Estates, crumpled like a wet paper bag. Officer Ramirez expertly cuffed her and recited her Miranda rights. The click of the handcuffs was one of the most satisfying sounds I had ever heard. It was the sound of reality finally, decisively, slapping down petty tyranny. The movers, who had been watching this entire drama unfold with expressions ranging from astonishment to barely concealed glee, visibly relaxed. Dave, the foreman, gave me a subtle thumbs up. Mark, after ensuring Brenda was secured in the back of the cruiser with Officer Ramirez making notes, walked over to me. You okay, Dad? He asked, the professional mask finally dropping completely. Never better, son, I said, and I meant it. A wave of profound relief washed over me, so potent it almost made my knees buckle. It wasn't just about the rose bushes or the stones, it was about the years of petty harassment, the constant feeling of being watched and judged, the sheer, unadulterated arrogance of that woman. And now, here she was, facing actual consequences for her actions, not HOA-manufactured fines, but real, legal trouble. It was beautiful. Vindication tasted sweeter than any unapproved petunia. With Brenda Armitage safely, if unhappily, ensconced in the back of a police car, the movers resumed their work with renewed vigor. The truck was loaded in record time. As we pulled away from 124 Willow Creek Lane for the final time, I didn't even glance back. Pleasant Valley Estates and its self-appointed queen were now firmly in my rearview mirror, both literally and metaphorically. My new life, free of HOA busybodies and arbitrary rules, was beginning. The aftermath was, as you can imagine, quite the talk of Pleasant Valley Estates. News of Brenda's arrest for making a false police report spread like wildfire. She was formally charged, and eventually pleaded no contest to a lesser misdemeanor, receiving a hefty fine, far exceeding any HOA penalty she'd ever dished out, and a court order to attend an anger management course, which I found particularly ironic. She also had to pay a significant sum to the county for the cost of the unnecessary emergency response. The HOA board, facing a wave of resident outrage and embarrassment, quietly accepted her resignation a few weeks later. I heard they replaced her with a retired accountant who mostly just wanted the pool to be clean and the checks to balance. A revolutionary concept. Sarah and I settled into our new home, a charming little place with a big garden and, most importantly, no HOA. I planted those crimson glory roses with a particular sense of triumph. They thrived, their vibrant red a daily reminder of the day's sanity, and my son prevailed. I even bought some new decorative river stones, just because I could. The peace was palpable. No more looking over my shoulder, no more neon pink letters, no more community harmony vehicle casting its shadow. Looking back, the whole Brenda saga feels almost surreal. It's a testament, I suppose, to how a small amount of perceived authority can warp someone's perspective, leading them to believe their tiny kingdom's rules supersede common sense, decency, and even actual law. The lesson learned. Well, there are a few. Always know your rights. Document everything, especially when dealing with unreasonable people. My little trail camera footage of Brenda's tirade proved quite useful for Mark's report, apparently. And sometimes, the most satisfying victories come not from stooping to their level, but from letting them build their own scaffold, then calmly watching as they kick the stool out from under themselves. As for Brenda, I occasionally wonder what she's doing now. Is she terrorizing a new set of neighbors? Or did her public humiliation and brush with the law actually teach her something? I almost pity her, in a way. Imagine living a life so devoid of genuine purpose that your entire identity becomes wrapped up in enforcing rules about lawn ornaments. It's a sad sort of existence. But mostly, when I think of Brenda Armitage, I just chuckle and shake my head. She wanted to make a statement, to assert her dominance one last time. And she did. Just not the one she intended. It just goes to show you, doesn't it? Sometimes the universe has a funny way of delivering justice, occasionally with a little help from your friendly neighborhood police officer, who also happens to be your son.